Hello friends, today I'm doing something a little bit different. It's something that I've wanted to do for a very long time, but I had to pick up some skills before I could do it. I'm making a pattern available for free and then we're going to do a sew along. I decided to do doll socks because firstly I cannot justify charging for this pattern, it's too tiny, and also I think it's quite useful. So first what we are going to need to do is print out the pattern, so pop down into the description box and choose whether you want the A4 version or the US letter size version. Once the print dialog has come up, go into settings. You might want to put it onto monochrome because there is my logo on there which is in colour, so you might not want to waste your colouring. And then you need to check that it's not printing to fit the page or scaling. So click on the scale, click print 100% and then print that document out. Then go pour yourself a cup of tea. Don't bother to take the tea bag out and go back to your chaotic craft room. My printer takes ages to print out, so this was the perfect time to grab a brew. And then check back into your printer, see if your printout is there. If it's like mine, it won't be. So check the chaos on your floor for the printout. And then pop that on your desk. We're going to need a ruler to check the scale. This is super important to make sure that the socks are going to fit your doll in the end. I work in centimetres usually, but I did include inches because I know that's how Americans tend to work, and a lot of my viewers are in America. So if that's all okay, we can begin. I'm going to do the over the knee sock first. This sews the same way as the knee-high sock, by the way, so if you want to do either of those, this is the sew up you want to follow. I'm just cutting that pattern out. I've added chapters to this video to make it easier to skip around. Check the description box or the progress bar to move along to where you want to be. I'm just double checking the seam allowance here. I do this with my own patterns, with commercial patterns. I'm working with a 7mm seam allowance here. This pattern is drafted for a stretch fabric. I've got quite a lot of examples here, but I just wanted to show you some different things that are available. So I tend to work with this cotton jersey. It has a grain line, so it looks like little V's on one side. I'm just checking to see which is the stretchier direction. Usually fabrics will be stretchier one way than another. Sometimes it's very, very obvious. Sometimes it's a lot less obvious. This is a coated spandex or lycra. Rib is very obvious for which way that it stretches. This is usually used for kind of the cuffs of sweaters. This is a stretchy denim fabric, so this is great for making doll jeans actually, rather than using actual denim. This is bamboo. This is one of my favourites. It's very thin. It does have a right and a wrong side though. One side has the V's and one looks like little straight stitches. And then this is an old t-shirt. This is stretch, but it's still cotton. If I was using this, I would take advantage of that hemmed edge and not hem it myself. I'd cut along the edge of that. This is swimsuit lining fabric actually. I'm not sure which is the stretchier direction, so I'm going to show you a way to check that. We need to know which direction is stretchier because we want the stretch to be widthways to allow for the stretch to let the doll's leg fit nicely, but we don't need it to stretch lengthways to make it longer or shorter. So I'm taking a ruler, I'm putting one pin in, and then I'm only going to do 5 centimetres because this is a tiny scale that we're working on. 5 centimetres away I'm going to put another pin in. Any pin, a needle will work, some stitches would probably work. Hold your first pin very tightly and then pull the fabric and see where that needle goes. So this moved 3 centimetres, so I know that that's about a 60% stretch. Then I'm going to do exactly the same in the other direction. This time it only moved 2.5 centimeters, so I know that's a 50% stretch. This is a 4-way stretch fabric, but it still has one way stretchier than the other. So I'm going to make the over the knees in this grey. I'm just showing you there, that's the wrong side, this is the right side, but you can choose. If something is technically the inverted commas wrong side, doesn't matter. If you want to use it that way, that becomes your right side. So I'm just roughly estimating how much fabric I'm going to need for these 2 socks. I'm going to cut them both at the same time. This is a huge piece of fabric and I just want to get this little piece off so that it's easier to manage. Realised here that I'd rather use my fabric scissors because those orange handled ones are blunt. Then I'm folding that in half, checking that the bigger stretch is the way that it's going to stretch on the doll. Then I'm pinning that to the fabric. I'm making sure to try and get the fabric as flat as possible. Here it was a bit wrinkled and that will mean that I'll cut the pattern out wrongly and I'll have a bit of trouble sewing it up later. So I'm just taking the time to repin that, make sure it's flat and get it cut out well. It was here that I realised my sewing shears also need to be sharpened. I don't have a sharp pair of scissors, I'm not happy. This fabric is very soft and movable, so I found it a little bit easier to cut some bits with it flat on the table so that it didn't flop away. You could pin it more, you could use a rotary cut, you could even draw around the pattern and then cut out along those lines if you wanted, whatever you find is easier. Just trimming that tiny little extra bit there. I'm going to show you how to sew up just one sock. They're not reversible, they're just the same for each foot. So I find the right side. This is where I realised my camera strap had been dangling in front of me the whole video. And then I'm going to fold the top of the sock over so that the wrong side is facing me and then pin that down. So the little fold over, that's the right side that's showing. And then folding that towards the wrong side. I'm going to pin that. I tend to pin this way, I find it easier to take the pins out and it works better for me on this tiny scale. And then I'm going to sew along this line. I'm using my machine, but you can totally do this by hand. We're going to use a straight stitch, although as this is stretch fabric, we don't want any of these seams to stretch. I'm also using a walking foot, which is good for stretch fabric. We're sewing 7mm away from the edge of that fabric. I put the masking tape there to give me a guideline. So I've just put the needle down, lifted the foot, and then took out that first pin. I tend to use the buttons on the top of my machine rather than a foot. I find it easier and I go pretty slow. I stop before each pin to take it out. Sometimes I'll lift the foot to take the pin out. I find that easier with stretch fabric. I found the fabric there was just bunching a little bit, so again I'm lifting the foot to allow me to move the fabric at the back out of the way. At both the beginning and the end of this line I've done a couple of back stitches. The walking foot stops the stretch material from overstretching while you're sewing and distorting it. If you don't have a walking foot and you're having trouble, put something in the comments and I'll make a video about how to solve that. I find for me that if I trim all the threads while I'm working very close to the piece, then I don't end up with a tangled mess at the end. So right sides together again, that means that seam is going to be facing us. Hi, Reap. Just going to fold that in half and have a cat invader. Try and line up these seams nicely. That'll give you a really good finish to the top of the sock. The cat's optional, you don't actually need cats to do this, but it is helpful. So now we're going to sew the length of the sock. I'm going to try and get this contour in to make it fit around the doll quite nicely. Helpful kitty. Sometimes I start at the cuff of the sock, sometimes I start at the toe. I've not really noticed a difference. So I'm putting that needle in, doing a couple of back stitches, and then I'm going to sew kind of to the first bump in the sock. Then what I'm going to do is leave my needle down, lift the foot, and then turn the sock a little bit. This will give you a good angle on the sock. And I keep getting help from the cat. She's got to go. I keep doing that, the length of the sock, to try and get that contour. Some people do find this easier with a foot pedal. I find it so much easier with the hand buttons. It just totally depends. This is just a beginner level sewing machine. I think it cost me about $200. I'm very happy with it, and I've tried to find a similar model to put in my affiliate links, and I haven't found one, I'm afraid. I'll keep looking. The masking tape there on the sewing machine is to show me where my seam line is, to make sure that I'm staying 7 millimeters while I'm sewing. A couple of back stitches at the toe. And then trimming that thread super close. All of this seam allowance is going to be really bulky in the final sock, so what we're going to do is just trim it down pretty close to the stitch line. Be very careful not to cut through the stitch line. This is knit fabric. Stretch doesn't tend to really fray that much, so we don't need to treat the edges at all. Couple of straggly threads that I'm just going to trim off as well. Then we need to turn it inside out. I'm using the handle of a paintbrush to help, and then later a screwdriver. You kind of just stuff the sock into itself and then push. Give it a go, it's not difficult. There we go, there's your sock. Just need to grab a model and check that it fits nicely. What do you think? I really like these socks rolled down actually, I think they look really cute. So now we're going to move on to the ankle sock, which has a little bit of a different way to sew it. The knee-high sock sews in exactly the same way as the over-the-knee sock, it's just shorter. So again, I'm just cutting out that pattern. And then in the same way, I'm just going to find a square of this swimsuit lining fabric. This is the first time I've sewn with this and even cut it out. And I found that it was actually really difficult to deal with the two socks in the same cut. So I ended up having to recut one sock because they were so wonky. So if you're struggling, just cut each sock separately. I'm checking here to see if the fabric has a right and a wrong side, and to my eye I can't see a difference between the two sides. I think this would have been a lot easier if my scissors were sharp and smaller. Time for a new pair maybe? So you can see here that the sock pattern is a bit wonky, so I cut a new one which is more symmetrical. So then I'm going to fold that in half. This one we don't need to sew the hem at the top, and I'll show you why later. So I'm just pinning the bottom half, the foot half here. And then we're going to sew about half of the sock, leaving the top open. So from kind of the ankle down to the toe. Couple of back stitches. And I'm pivoting that needle again, leaving the needle down, lifting the foot and twisting the fabric to try and get that contour.
What?
Again, the sock was bunching a little bit under the foot, so I had to get more help from a different cat. A very dusty cat. While he's here, if you do end up making these socks, please tag me on social media. I'd love to see them. I want to see the fabrics, I want to see how they turn out. If you have trouble, definitely tag me, or even just message me and I'll try and give you a hand. Sewing down to the toe and then doing a back stitch again. Blunt scissors. And we're going to trim that now before turning it. I'm hoping to make these patterns quite regularly. Although in future I am going to charge for them, they're going to be available to my patrons for free. So now we're going to sew up the top of the sock. Back stitches at the beginning and end again. So this is a rolled down ankle sock. If you wanted a regular ankle sock, I'd maybe cut 1 centimetre off the top of the knee-high pattern and then use that one, but sew it up in the same way as the over the knee. So again, we're just going to trim that seam allowance down. It tangled a lot at the back. I get this sometimes. If you know why, tell me. To be honest, I'm a self-taught sewist, so I am not an expert. I'm just passing on what I have learned. Tidying up those threads as well. So volunteer again. And we're just going to roll that top down. It is a little bit fiddly, I'm not going to lie, but it looks super cute. So let me know if you make these. Check out my social media, it's down below. Thanks again for watching. Like, subscribe, all the good YouTube fun things. And thanks for sticking around and always supporting me. See you soon. Bye.